welcome to Pakistani Profile. My guest for today is not only a trained youth trainer but also an entrepreneur and an active social worker. He enjoys his work and loves to interact with people, and maybe that is one reason why he's managed to capture such a large number of fans because of the positive response and the positive message that he passes on to others. Let's welcome Umair Jalianwala. Hi, Umair.
Hi, thank you for having me over.
Thank you so much for being part of our show. So, Umair, we're going to link this to your personal life first. Tell me more about your childhood and your education.
I was based in Hyderabad. Hyderabad is a small place next to Karachi, and that's where most of the schooling happened. And I shared this during my trainings that my childhood was, I'd get up at 7 in the morning, get to my school at 8 o'clock, be in the school till about 2 o'clock, come back, get tuitions from 3 to 8. And at times when I would just come back, my brother and I, from the tuition, and we'd see the sun, we'd be so surprised to see the sun up, because all that we did was schooling and tuition. Right. And that's because my dad had worked really hard to be where he is today, from being a shorthand typist to becoming the senior HR manager. And when you yourself have such a background, you would not like your children to go through such struggle.
Right.
So his emphasis was that you should have a strong foundation, strong base. And I remember that I could not watch onto the shows that kids would normally do. I couldn't play any games. And perhaps that's also one of the reasons why I started doing the work that I do.
Right.
So that was schooling. I was always a high achiever.
So you were a good student.
Yeah, I was, no doubt about that. I've always been, and somehow that also helped in future, which I'm going to talk about later. But extracurricular was also one strong area, right. And also what we were just talking about, I think, getting students together on a certain task. For example, I was never selected to be part of the cricket team, so I got my own team together, and I went to the principal and said that you should not play with people who are the best. You should play with people who are passionate. And I said, oh, all right, you make your own team, and such kind of stunts that we always put up against teachers, against the system. So that's what schooling has been about.
Okay. So what was your goal back then as a student? And how has that changed? Has that changed over time? And what the goal was back then, has that been achieved till now?
It's interesting, and I share this in my career programs, that back in class 2, when you used to write myself paragraphs, I would always end the paragraph by saying my aim in life is to become a cricket commentator.
Okay.
And I was so inspired by Ravi Shastri and Tony Greek and Jeff Boycott, who could turn these matches around, make them so much more exciting. So that's what my mission always was. And my teacher would cut it out and say engineer, say doctor instead, which were regular career patterns that we are fed into. When I reached my intermediate level, and that's when I moved to Karachi, and I would have my bike and I would go to my college and then university. When I would be riding my bike, I would always be thinking that I'm a minister or I'm a politician and I'm addressing the nation. And I'd go on and on doing these different talks as to why did we take this step, why didn't we do this, talking to the nation. But later on, I became a trainer.
Right.
And somehow, and that's another interesting point to catch on to, there's some similarity between these three.
Right.
Which is the mic factor, which is talking, which is the popularity bit. And somehow the other, that's the belief that I have, that you have to see the target you want to get to. And by seeing, I mean that if you want to ever become a commentator or ever become an actor, you have to see an audience in front of you. You have to feel what they would be feeling. You have to see what they'll be seeing. You have to hear what they'll be hearing. And that somehow connects later on. Like Steve Jobs also said, things do connect on.
Yeah. So, Umair, why did you choose to become a trainer?
When I was doing my BBA, Bachelor's in Business Administration, I specialized in marketing. At that point in time, I was pretty convinced to get into the corporate sector because it somehow felt like that's the only respectable profession around, and because Dad had done it and my brother was doing it.
I guess that's the image that we've given from childhood.
We usually do, yeah. So, and I got into an internship program of a very good company, and somehow or the other I ended up becoming the best intern there. So I was offered their management training program, which is usually after your graduation. And so here I had this option, and on the other end I was working with School of Leadership, doing youth training programs, and I used to do 90-minute career planning sessions back then. And one of the telecoms was sponsoring me across 18 universities in Pakistan. And those 90 minutes, you wouldn't believe, we used to talk to people and they would come back crying and they'd say, why didn't you tell this earlier? We've invested all that we had. We've done 4 years of the studies. We really don't want to do this. And we saw engineers who could perhaps be guitarists. We saw doctors who could perhaps be painters. We saw business students who were perhaps so much better at media or so many other things.
Right.
So at that point in time, I had this choice whether I should go for the management training program or keep doing this work, which was very fascinating, which had a celebrity feel to it.
And a lot of scope.
It had a lot of scope, but very little of financial scope.
Right.
Because, and to date, I don't know what I'll be doing. Alhamdulillah, now I can tell that what I'm doing for the next 2 months. But what if there's some emergency that strikes us? Because training is the first expense that the companies will go down on.
Yeah.
And it's even calling it an expense reflects the mindset itself. So here I was. So I picked training as a profession, and I started doing this. 8 months I'd be going around and people would say, you've gone crazy. Nobody's going to pay you. You're 22 right now. Who'd like to listen to you? Who'd like to learn from you?
Yeah, because the general perception is that a trainer needs to have that much of experience to be able to train others.
Yeah, and somehow the paradigm about gray hair or about having a belly and some big degree that you would have. So we were combating all of that, but I'm glad I made this choice. It's so relaxing today. The way I'm dressed right now, that's the way I go to work. And what I do, every bit of it, even if it's small thing back in the office, it's so much more meaningful. Everything has a meaning.
Right. So it does attract you.
It does. It does.
Right.
And like I say, my mission is to turn people on it. And I think in order to be able to do that mission, accomplish that mission, I have to be turned on myself. And it's my work that does it.
Umair, you're also involved in social work. More like, what are you associated with? What is being done right now?
Yeah. I've been very lucky to have seen generation of youth, because I've been doing this for about 5 years now. And people who I trained 5 years ago, 4 years ago, are now running their own organizations or are now ending up in different places. Somehow or the other, I have never started something in terms of social context. The only thing that I did last year was at Razakabad camp, wherein there were IDPs from all across Sindh, the flood affectees. And we went there and did engagement exercises with them. That's the only initiative that I have taken. Other than that, what I usually do is just join in the causes. And I think there's so much work that's going on. And just picking up a cause and putting it on my profile, if that can make a difference, then why not? So my social angle is attached to my supporting the causes that are already there.
Right. Who has been your inspiration?
That reminds me of one of my mentors, Kamran Rizvi. He says that just like how you can adopt anyone around, you can adopt children. Why can't you adopt all these gurus? Why can't you adopt Bill Gates? Why can't you adopt Steve Jobs as your grandfather? And only when you do it, you realize you're from his family, and perhaps you're supposed to think like that. So my inspiration has been the amazing authors that I've read, from Mumtaz Muftis of the world to Jim Collins about business, or Stephen Covey about life. From these authors to some local people like Shireen, like Kamran, who've been doing this work in Pakistan. And now I've explored an entire fraternity of people, and I think now I've arrived at a level where inspiration is not bound to a personality. Inspiration could be that simple flower that is in front of you, or could be these lights which are just staying focused on us. It could be simple things that you can get inspired from.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be people.
Yeah.
It can be anything around you.
Yes, and it's only I share this in my trainings. Like Khalil Gibran said, if God gave you the eyes, if you were in your senses, you would perhaps learn silence from the talkative. You would learn how to be respectful from the disrespectful. So everything then becomes a message for you. So inspiration for me now, it could be those the cab drivers that I write on to every now and then, listening to their stories and where they have come from. That could be perhaps more inspiring than what I read in some great bestseller.
Right. Umair, you are very, very famous among the young generation. What is that one factor that you consider attracts youth towards you?
I've received this feedback that you do on stage what we do in our groups. You see, there's when you get onto the stage, you realize, there's certain constraints that you need to stay in. The language has to be sophisticated, and what you're saying has to be in certain boundaries. And I think when I started out, and I was very bold in that way, that I would go around and say all that I had to. So I could give these examples of picking up a career of personal choice, of passionate choices, is just like making love and having sex. And the act is the same, but the spirit can make so much of a difference. And giving these examples in auditoriums, schools that we went to, colleges that we went to, and teachers would be stunned. What is he talking about? But that's how I connected with youngsters, because that's the kind of language that they understood. So I think, and my inspiration came from Sufis here. Because Sufis came over from different places. No Sufi died in the land that he or she was born in.
Right.
And they traveled all across, and wherever they set up, wherever they settled in, they became like the people there. So they were involved in the festivals, they would wear their colors, they would speak their language, and it's that character that inspired people. So because I was a youth trainer previously, now I do a lot of work in the corporate sector. So I spoke their language. I think the best part was that I could say whatever I wanted to say in the way I'd like to say.
So you basically made them feel one of you.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Umair, in the end, your message for the nation of Pakistan.
Yeah, that's the tricky bit, especially after this long conversation that we had before the show. But I think this comes from Elizabeth Gilbert. I recently finished this book, Eat, Pray, Love, and there's also a very interesting TED Talk that I recommend the viewers to see, which is about creativity. And wherein she talks about that when you've already written a bestseller, how difficult is it to write another one? And because she already had a crazy bestseller, it was so difficult for her to get back into the writing mode because the expectations are so high.
Right.
But then in the talk, she talks about how creativity was previously not attributed to the individual himself or herself. It was rather a divine intervention. And she attributes creativity to that. And that can just put you out of the throne and you wouldn't feel so tense. But she said this beautiful thing. And she said that sometimes your creative genius will do wonders. And sometimes it will just do a ridiculous job. But what we've got to do is to do our best with whatever we have and whatever time that we have.
And not fear failure.
Yeah. So in whatever capacity we are, whether it's the school that we're talking about or that little organization or that little community that you're part of, do the best that you can with it. And that will be enough.
Right. Thank you so much, Umair.
Thank you so much.
Wish you all the best for the future.
Thanks a lot.
For more Pakistani profiles, visit our website, pakistaniprofiles.com.